So, hello, good evening. I am Rob Hopkins, and it is my huge pleasure to be able to speak with you this evening and to share some ideas from the book which I just wrote, which is called How to Fall in Love with the Future, which hopefully will be arriving in French sometime soon. And I want to share with you some of the core ideas from this book. So, the first thing to say is the context of why I wrote this book, because we are in a climate and ecological emergency, and climate science is very complex, but it's not complicated. There is a difference between these things. And this is a way of making climate science really simple. Number one, it's warming. We can see that the world is warming. Spain just last week broke the hottest ever temperature recorded in Spain. France this year has had more wildfires than any year since 1949. You will have seen where you are that it has been very, very hot this year. And this is part of a trend. The world is warming. Number two, it's us. We know what is causing this. It's us. It's human beings. It's our addiction to burning things, mainly fossil fuels and forests. Number three, we're sure there is now no debate among credible people who understand the science of what is happening, that this is a process being driven by human activity. Number four, it's bad. We can already see the impacts of this everywhere in the world. There is nowhere in the world that is not touched by this. They are breaking temperature records in Sweden, in Norway, in Denmark this summer, all around the world. And this is only heading at the moment in one direction. But number five, we can do something about this. I was in France 3 years ago, and I met some people working for the environment minister in France. And they said the minister is writing a report about how France can adapt to a world that has increased by 4 degrees. I said, I can save you the money. I can save you the time. There is absolutely no way France can adapt to a 4-degree world or a 3-degree world. Even a 2-degree world is going to be an enormous struggle. So where was their report about how France could do everything it could possibly do to avoid that? They didn't have that. They hadn't done that. It was one of the most irresponsible things I've ever heard from a government minister, I think. So when we look at what a world that has warmed by 3 degrees, what would that mean? 3 degrees doesn't sound very much, right? You turn the heating up in your house by 3 degrees, it doesn't make that much difference. A world that has warmed by 3 degrees, the dark red color that you see across the middle here, that's parts of the world where it is above 35 degrees for at least 150 days a year. These areas become unlivable, uninhabitable. This is an absolute catastrophe if we get to this point. But at the moment, we are headed for 3 degrees of warming by about 2070. If we continue as we are, this is profoundly dangerous. And climate change is the existential threat that we face. If we had started trying to address this in 2020, in the year 2000, or in maybe 2007, when we started the transition movement, it would actually have been quite easy. A gentle transition, we could have done it. It was not such a big deal. We have left this so late now that it is a very steep shift that we need to make. And in order to have any chance of doing what the Paris Agreement says and reaching that target, it means that we need to have cut emissions in France, in the UK, in the US, in the nations of the global north that are causing this crisis. We need to have cut our emissions by 45% by 2030. That's 5 years away. That's not very far at all. But we have to do this. I am not here this evening to negotiate with physics. That's not the point, right? I have children. I want us to be able to have a future in which my children can live good lives. At the moment, that is not where we are headed, right? So for me, when I look at this, we can either look at this and we can say, oh, this is too much. It's not, it's too difficult. We can't do it. What I want to shift this evening in your mind is to say, this could be the most thrilling, delicious adventure of our lives. We could still do this, and it would be the most extraordinary adventure that human beings ever undertook if we were to succeed in doing this. So sometimes climate scientists say, well, the only way to do it is that we do this. We call this emergency mode. I say emergency mode is a terrible name for it. Nobody is going to get excited about emergency mode. But maybe we could call it something else. Thrilling adventure mode, delicious opportunity mode, something like this. I don't know. But that's what I want to talk with you about this evening. So for me, when I think about what we need to do to tackle the climate emergency, it is very clear that the idea that we just give people lots and lots of information and that we talk to them about extinction and collapse and that will mobilize them at scale has failed. It doesn't work. We need another approach because that doesn't work. So what else might work? What I want to suggest to you this evening is that maybe what might work is that we need to think about longing, about that profound desire. How do we build a movement which is not dedicated to giving people information, but instead is dedicated to the cultivation of longing? And the novelist Don DeLillo, he once wrote, longing on a large scale is what makes history. Longing on a large scale is what makes history. This is so important, I think. How do we do that? How do we cultivate longing so that people wake up every morning and that's where they want to get? We have to make this irresistible. We have to make this delicious and feeling like an adventure. So this is my town. This is where I live. This is Totnes. It's where the transition movement started. And you may know many things about Totnes. It's a place where lots of interesting things happen. What you may not know is that Totnes is also the place that has developed the world's first actual, fully functioning time machine. Yes, you heard it here first. And this is actually my colleague, Mr. Kit. And together with him, we regularly travel to that 2030, because there's the question, if you built a time machine, where would you want to go? Some people say, I would want to go to visit the dinosaurs. Some people might say, I want to go and meet Shakespeare, whatever. I'm not interested in that. I want to go to the 2030 where we have cut emissions by 45%. And people can see the world around them changing, getting better, mental health improving, democracy coming together again. That's what excites me. And so with Mr. Kit, with our time machine, we take regular journeys, adventures to visit that 2030 that resulted from us doing everything we could have possibly done. And we go there to make recordings and to gather things, to bring back to those people in 2025 for whom this seems impossible, for whom despair is a very, very strong experience. We bring that future back to share with them. And that's what I want to do with you today. I want to share with you what we've done on that. And if you might at this moment still be thinking, Rob, I don't believe that you have made a time machine. I don't believe that you can travel through time. My friends, I have some evidence. This is a film. You will see my wife, Emma, in the kitchen in my house, And if you look very closely, you will see me setting off on one of my adventures to 2030. So you see, this is some very, very powerful quantum technology that we have developed here. And what I want to do is to share with you some insights from a recent trip that we took there. So you might like to think of me as being like the Marco Polo of the climate movement, sharing a great and extraordinary adventure with you. So this is where we set up our time machine. You know this street. It's very, very close to where you live. And we set the controls on our time machine for 2030. We pressed the button. And then when we stepped out a couple of minutes later into 2030, this street, just 5 years in the future, now looked like this. Ooh. And the first impression that we had when we arrived into this street was how much louder the bird song was than the world we had left behind. And secondly, it was how delicious the air smelled, so much cleaner than the air that we had left behind. And the third and the most important thing that we saw in this 2030 was a look in people's eyes, the people who passed us. There was this sense of excitement, this sense of, I think we might just make it, which we hadn't seen in 2030. It's why you saw in the pictures of us in our time travel suits that we have to wear the white costumes because they have a special anti-cynicism coating that stops us from contaminating the world when we visited. And when you turned and looked the other way, it looked like this. So you can see the infrastructure where the cars used to be, but that's been taken back now. And so cities are now much more designed for people, for children, for wildlife, for nature. It was a beautiful, beautiful thing to see. And my friends, the bicycle rush hours of 2030 were an extraordinary thing to see because we had built the infrastructure for people to use, and people used it. Because we realized in the France of 2025 that every €1,000,000 we spent building really great infrastructure for cycling actually saved us €19 million off the national health bill. It was not an expense. It was an investment into well-being and health. And that's where we decided we needed to focus. So you might remember back in 2025, when you drove into the big cities like Lyon or into Paris, that you saw those big signs that would tell you digitally how many car parking spaces there were in different car parks. In this 2030, we have a similar system, but we have built so many places for people to store their bicycles safely, freely, cleanly, that we need signs like this now. They're all in Dutch. I'm not quite sure why. But this was the infrastructure that we have built. Those underground car parks that used to be full of cars are now full of bicycles. And this change happened very quickly when the government decided this is what we're going to do. This is where we're going. Society moved very quickly to embrace it. Now, every train station you walk out of anywhere in France, this is what you see. And people have shifted and embraced this new way of living and feel so much better and healthier as a result. And also, another thing that we saw in many places that we visited was that we didn't see very many new buildings made with cement and concrete anymore, because we realized in 2025 that 9% of carbon emissions globally are caused by the use of cement and concrete, and we couldn't do it anymore. So Now people build new buildings using materials from much more local. So using straw, using clay, using lime, using timber, using stone. Every town, every city is now ringed by a new industry processing those local materials to make beautiful ecological homes, affordable homes. And many places that we visited as well, we saw this, where the community had organized to close their street to cars, to take that space back for children and nature. And the people on this street were very excited to show us what this street had looked like back in 2025. It had looked like this. Now it looked like that. And again, these changes happened very quickly. And when they started, they began to cascade very, very quickly through society. And many places that we went, we saw this. This was one of the sites that made me feel most excited when we arrived into this future. It was the removal of concrete, of tarmac, of hard surfaces. In this 2030, the cities felt so much softer, more porous, more absorbent somehow, because we were removing this. You will remember in that very hot summer of 2025, if you lived in the city, this stuff made your city so much hotter. It held so much heat. So in this 2030, the depaving movement was growing very quickly. This movement to remove hard surfaces. We went to visit this school playground, for example. People told us in 2025, there was 2 or 3 months when it was so hot, the children couldn't even go into the playground because it was too hot. Back in 2025, it used to look like this. Then the municipality, they removed the tarmac, and now it looks like this. And it's cooler, and it absorbs more water. There's more space for nature. And this is now happening at speed all across Europe, all across the world. But what was amazing to see in 2030 was that it was not being done with the government just telling people that's what they had to do. This became a competition between neighborhoods, between towns, between cities. There was a challenge. It was a sense of excitement. There was a sense of ambition and civic pride in making this happen. People didn't talk about it as if it was about getting rid of something. They talked about liberating soil. And I brought you back from 2030, the front page of Forbes magazine, you know, the business magazine. I'm sure you've seen it. Well, this is a front cover from 2030 showing the jobs that young people now leave university, leave school, aspiring to do. Nobody now leaves school and wants to work in a hedge fund or work in fintech, whatever fintech is, or wants to work in finance. People now, they want to be a depaver, removing concrete and tarmac. They want to work in local banks, farming on rooftops, growing seaweed, being a master composter. The culture in this 2030 is changing very, very quickly as people become more and more excited about the changes that they see happening in the world. And what's so interesting in 2030 is how we message this stuff. You might remember back in 2025, when the government would try to encourage people to use less energy, use less water, it was it was not exciting. It didn't feel like an invitation. But I have brought you back, my friends, from 2030, an advert from the TV. Again, it's in Dutch. I'm not quite sure why. It doesn't matter. You don't have to understand what they're saying, but you get from this video the sense, like the spirit of this, the energy of this. It's beautiful. And this same energy is now used to encourage people to use less energy, grow more food. I'll show you this video and you'll understand what I mean.
Overschrijden de competitie. Wie wint de gouden giet? Vlaanderen.
Oranje.
in deze steengoede wedstrijd in Nederland is. Wie wint de meeste dekens, heb het langste behaald. De eerste dekens vliegen eruit en de mandjes gaan goed. Wip jij ook mee? Geef je gewipte dekens op van 21 maart tot 31 oktober.
Isn't that beautiful? And it's a similar, this sort of competitive, excited spirit is now used to communicate all of the elements of how this transition is happening. We went to visit whole neighborhoods where the cars have been designed out, no space for cars at all. When you visit a neighborhood with no cars, it sounds so different than the world that we are used to. I realized when I was walking here that I could hear people having piano lessons in their house. That never happened before in the world that I had traveled from. This is now when you go to Paris, you look out across the rooftops of Paris, partly because as the world warmed, there was the need to cover roofs. But there is a whole parallel world going on rooftops across the cities. Food being grown, plants being grown to attract insects back. There's, in fact, now in Paris, there is a government program to build bridges between buildings because there are so many interesting rooftops that you can now bring your bicycle up and cycle around between the different rooftops to see all the different things that are happening up there. And also in 2030, we don't see so much flooding anymore because human beings developed the humility to recognize that beavers are much better hydrological engineers than human beings could ever possibly be. So those areas where the water would come from when we had floods, we gave them back to the castor. And the castor, they transformed these places. The biodiversity exploded. They locked lots and lots of carbon up. Incredible achievements that were made just by human beings saying, okay, maybe beavers are better at this than we are. Agriculture really changed during this time as well. We moved away from monoculture. We embraced more agroforestry, use of permanent plants covering the ground. In 2030, people eat about 70% less meat than they ate in 2025. But the extraordinary thing was that nobody really noticed that transition happening. It just kind of happened. And around most universities now, there is no grass left around the universities. Universities are surrounded by food being grown, as are most public buildings. Food being grown has now just become a part of the urban landscape everywhere that we go. This is a market garden that we went to visit in the middle of the city, surrounded by apartments. This is 1 hectare of ground. They employ 2 people, and they generate 200,000 euros every year from this small patch of ground. The use, the art of growing the most food possible on the smallest amount of land is now one of the great innovations and technologies of 2030. Not AI. Everybody's forgotten about AI by 2030. This is what's much, much more interesting to people. How do we do this? We went to visit this town where now they grow 100%, well, 80% of the food consumed in the schools here is grown in the town. It's 100% organic. But what they found when they made this shift was that it impacted on the wider community too. That we found that when a municipality moves with purpose and boldness and vision and imagination, people follow along. So here, 5 years after they introduced this new system, this new, much more local system, it cost the same as the school dinners made by Sodexo and other companies like this, but it was mostly grown here in the town. They found that the people here, nothing even to do with the school, the general population now eat 30% less ultra-processed food, 23% less meat, more local, more organic, more seasonal food. The culture is changing because we moved with purpose. And it was an incredible place to go and visit. You know, having been to see this 2030 that I'm sharing with you, having walked there, having smelt it, having listened to it, having felt it, it always makes me feel really emotional to be able to sit here and tell you about this future that is around the corner. And of course, if you knew where to look in 2025, this future was already there. This is the city of Liège in Belgium, where they are building a food belt around the city of Liège, which started in 2014 with 5 people from the local transition group sitting around a table with an idea. By 2018, they had raised 5 million euros from young people, from local people. By 2025, the municipality had invested millions of euros. They were producing thousands of school meals every day. And the idea had already spread to 6 other cities in Belgium. By 2030, this is the new normal. Every city is building a food belt because it makes so much more sense than not building a food belt. One of the things that I remember from 2025 was a survey which said that nearly 50% of young people said they would much rather live without the internet. It really surprised me in 2025 when I saw that. But the way that that was visible in 2030 was a huge movement led by young people away from social media, away from AI, away from smartphones that dominate our every waking moment. Instead, we saw a movement that was about analog, that was about real experiences, real meetings with other people. And so in that 2030, we saw this, this just people coming together to eat together, to meet, to play cards, to play games. People are turning back towards real experiences of connection with other people. It was a very, very beautiful thing to see. And now in 2030, most of our energy comes from renewable energy, but the majority of that renewable energy is in community ownership. We own it. And if you knew where to look in 2025, you could already see the seeds of the community energy movement across France, the energy co-ops that you could find in many places. This became mainstream very, very quickly. So all of us are members of an energy cooperative and we benefit from that. So I'm just going to pause here and take a breath and bring us back from 2030 back to 2025. Welcome home. And just to make the point that, as William Gibson, the science fiction writer, said, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. All the stories that I've told you from our adventure in 2030 actually already exist now in 2025. We started our journey in Amsterdam. We went to Barcelona. We went to see the bicycles of Utrecht in Holland, where 40,000 bicycles cycle into the centers of that city every day. We went to see the amazing ecological housing of Leeds in the UK. We saw the renewable energy, the cooperative community energy of Brixton in London. We visited, we saw the beavers in Cornwall, and so on and so on. The school playground with the tarmac removed is from Val de Roye in France. The street that was closed by the people is in Lausanne in Switzerland. The whole neighborhood with no cars is the Vauban in Freiburg. The town where they produce the school food is in Mouansartou, which is close to Nice, and so on and so on. We are not waiting for some amazing new technology to show us how to save the world at this time. Everything we need to know already exists. The problem that we have is that nobody knows these stories. We very rarely hear these stories. And that then the way that we talk about making change does not cultivate longing to see this world happen. So what I want to do in my last little bit of this presentation is to talk about how, as people who want to make change in the world, how we started doing that differently in 2025 in such a way that we managed to create that 2030. So I saw 4 years ago, a young woman at a Black Lives Matter protest in Washington wearing a t-shirt, and it said, "I've been to the future, we won." And it gave me goosebumps when I saw it. Maybe it's giving you goosebumps now. And it made me think that there's a very different way that we should be talking about climate change, rather than just talking about extinction and collapse. It's important we talk about those things sometimes because they're a very real possibility. But if that's all we talk about and we don't give people other visions, we will fail, I think, because we're living in a time where the extreme right are painting terrifying visions of the future and then are saying, but we are strong, powerful men, and we will protect you from that. If at the same time, progressive people who understand climate science are doing the same thing, people have nowhere to go. So for me, this was a really important shift. I've been to the future, we won. What does it look like if we build our activism around this? This is in London in 2019, in April, the first Extinction Rebellion, when Extinction Rebellion closed Waterloo Bridge, which is normally just full of cars, and they turned it into a forest. They brought 49 large trees in pots onto Waterloo Bridge, and for 8 days, they turned that bridge into a forest. I call this a pop-up tomorrow. A pop-up tomorrow. How do we bring tastes of that future that I have just taken you to? How do we give people tastes of that right now that they can see and touch and feel? I always talk about this when I give presentations, and so far I have met 5 people who said, I used to work near Waterloo Bridge. I had to cross that bridge every day. And when it was like this, I stopped on that bridge and I thought, why can't it always be like this? It's a pop-up tomorrow. It gives people a taste of how that future could be. And it's a very, very powerful thing to do. And we really don't do it enough. And in storytelling, in dystopian storytelling, people are really good at recognizing the power of place to make those stories much stronger. If you've seen The Handmaid's Tale, one of the most powerful dystopian novels and TV series that I've ever seen, very, very disturbing, about a kind of a fascist patriarchy takeover of the United States. They use places that we recognize, like this place in Washington, but they use it to give people a vision of a dystopian future. What does it look like if we do the same for positive stories about the future? This is an organization. This is Trafalgar Square in London. I'm sure many of you will have been to Trafalgar Square. And for one day last year, an organization rewilded Trafalgar Square. As part of a campaign to promote rewilding, they rewilded Trafalgar Square. They worked during the night. In the morning, people arrived. What's happened here? This is not how it is usually. Again, they created a pop-up tomorrow in a place that people really, really knew. I think that's a really, really important thing to do. So in this book that I've been writing, which is called How to Fall in Love with the Future, the first question that I ask, as I mentioned, was, what does our activism look like if its primary objective is the cultivation of longing? The second question that underpins the book is, what does our activism look like if we act as though time travel was possible? And what I mean by that is, what does our activism look like if we become more playful with time? Usually when we are activists, our work is in the present. What do we want? When do we want it? Now. No one ever says, when do we want it? In 200 years, 30 years ago. It's always now. This is a beautiful story that I found from Canada, an artist called Camille Turner. And in Canada, we all know that in the United States, the slave trade was a huge, huge thing, terrible, evil, wicked thing that happened in the United States. Canada tells a story about itself where it says, we were the good guys, we were the nice people, where the slaves could run to escape and be safe. It wasn't quite like that. There was a very active slave trade in Canada. And so Camille Turner did a whole lot of research in the archives in Canada and found things like this, someone offering a reward because their slave had escaped, an advert for a slave auction. And then she laminated all of this material, put it on a table. People were invited to come in and read this material and learn about the slave trade. She called this project the Afronautic Research Labs. The bit that I love about this story is the role of the two people you can see in the background. The two black people in the background, they are the Afronauts. They wear this very ceremonial clothes. And the story is that this moment of people in Canada learning and understanding the scale of what happened in the slave trade is so important that they have traveled back from the future to witness this moment. They have traveled back from a future in which people of color are flourishing and thriving. They have come back to this time. They don't speak. They just observe. They just bear witness. And for me, this idea that we do activism that uses the future to understand the past, and that we mix these things up, is really, really exciting to me, that we become more playful with time. And so I talk a lot in my workshops and things about this idea that we need to build time machines. You need to build time machines, things that allow you to help people travel with you into the future that you long for, so that you can share it with people. And so I have this strange position in the world where people send me photographs of their time machines that they have made. This is one that somebody sent me the other day. This is somebody in Luxembourg who this was the time machine that they have built. Really quite an extraordinary thing. This is a woman in France called in Plabanec called Anaïg Plassard, who does a lot of work around time travel and playing with time. This is the time machine that she has built. It's fantastic. And this is a little video that's actually, no, because that's all in English. That won't really work. So I'm not going to show you that. But so the beautiful thing about time machines is that anything can be a time machine. If I stand up in front of 800 people and I say, this pen is a time machine, nobody is going to say to me, Rob, come on, explain to me the quantum mechanics of how that works. People say, oh, cool, where are we going? It allows you to be really playful in having a different conversation about the future. So I was about 2 years ago, I was on a Zoom with a man who was the head teacher of a school in British Columbia, Cortes Island in Canada, British Columbia. And we were talking about imagination and education. And in that call, I was talking about time machines and time travel and things. And a year later, he sent me an email and he said, Rob, after that conversation, we changed the whole final year of the students' life in our school. We changed the whole curriculum. So they spent the whole final year in 2040. They didn't stay in 2025 and think about what could the future be like. We traveled to 2040. We spent the year there, and we talked about what do we eat, where do we work, What's it like here? And then at the end of the year, they hired the biggest venue they could find in their community, and they turned it into a time machine. People had to walk in. You can see in the top right hand here, the time tunnel they had to walk in through. Then there was an art gallery of art from the future. There were leaflets here from the organizations that had made this transition possible, including, for example, the Ministry of Public Beauty, which was founded in 2026. He said to me, it was the most profound experience for them. It was an extraordinary experience for them to spend that year in the future. It really, really affected them very, very deeply. This is a local authority here in Wales, here in the UK, who are the first local authority to build a time machine. They are a national park in Wales. They wrote their management plan, which was a beautiful visionary document. It had poems from the future, postcards from the future, stories of how the transition happened, photographs of what this world looked like. I went to a conference where the two women who wrote this gave a conference, and afterwards, 3 months, and I talked about time travel and time machines. And a few months later, they wrote to me and said, Rob, we've built a time machine. They discovered they had a mobile planetarium they had bought maybe like 3 years earlier, because there was funding to buy mobile planetariums. They didn't know what to do with it. So they turned it into a time machine where they showed videos they had made from the past, from the present, and then they got the young people to make the videos from the future. Very powerful, very simple, very beautiful. They are now passionate advocates to other local authorities that they need to also start building time machines in this way. And in my own work, I'm always looking for ways that we can give people an experience where afterwards they say, when I was in the future. How do we give people the opportunity to rehearse the future so that it becomes familiar? The poet Rilke once said, the future must enter into you a long time before it happens. How do we do that? This is a beautiful activity called Town Anywhere, developed by my friend Ruth. And in this activity, you take between 50 and 400 people, and you imagine that you are traveling to the future. And then you think, okay, what am I doing in this future? What's my role here? What do I do? And then you meet other people who share that interest. And then together, literally, you build that world with cardboard and sticks and sticky tape and pens. You build a three-dimensional world of the future that you live in, celebrate in, trade in, grieve in. It's one of the most profound and extraordinary things I've ever been part of, to be with 300 adults in a world they've built that they absolutely believe in. It gives people that experience where afterwards they can say, with excitement, when I was in the future. Like, if we can connect people to the future that turned out the best it possibly could, it's such a powerful, beautiful thing to do. So before I finish and we have a bit of time for some questions, I just want to say a little bit about what I'm doing now in the work that I do. So I showed you this picture earlier. The other man here is called Mr. Kit, who is an amazing ambient electronic music artist. And we have created a project which is called Field Recordings from the Future. So I go to visit places, some of them ones that I've already shown you, that already sound like the future needs to sound like. And I make recordings there. And then together we make pieces of beautiful, immersive music so that people can really imagine what it would be like. And then together we create a live show with videos. And I just want to give you a little 1-minute taste of what that looks like.
Welcome to Field Recordings from the Future. Welcome to the future. Is this not outline? Extraordinary, otherworldly place.
And when you see the little mushrooms growing up, it's really satisfying.
People are no longer defined by their postcodes, and there are no areas of deprivation.
Such incredible cycling infrastructure. So
Take a deep breath and inhale crisp, clean, fresh air. This is home, and it's just gorgeous, just gorgeous.
So this is a live performance that we have developed, and we have performed a few times now in England, and our hope is that we will be able to, we would love to bring it to France. We're going to do in Luxembourg next year, but we'd love to also bring it to France and do it in France next year. And it's very, very beautiful, and it really gives people a sense that we've taken them to the future. And we've also been developing a comic book, which is about the story of how we built our time machine, working with an amazing Belgian cartoonist called Thomas Liera, which will be published in French next year, again, which will tell the story of the places that we visited and what happened there. And just the last thing is, and I'm going to stop, that's just in case you want to find out anything else about me and what I do. If you read English, I do a newsletter every month called the Time Traveler's Gazette, which you can subscribe to on my website. But I'm just going to stop sharing because I want to show you something. And I'm hoping that you're all still there after all of this. Hopefully you're all still there. And I just want to show you this device, which is behind me here. This is my this is our fortune telling machine, because one of the things that we're very excited about is this idea of how do we give connections to the future. And so this is a machine where you press the button and it prints out your future direct from 2030. Thanks to some amazing quantum technology, it's able to bring your future back from that. So this is, I've just printed out one here, which is for you, which says your decision not to buy any new clothes for the last 3 years has resulted in you having the coolest, most eclectic dress sense of anyone you know, one you are often complimented on. And it has many, many other features like this. We're also building a field recordings from the future jukebox and many other things. So for me, just to finish, to say, what really interests me right now is how do we give people multi-sensory tastes of the future that turned out the best it possibly could. And with that, this question of how do we put longing at the center of our activism, with that comes a realization that those of us who are activists, climate activists, are normally not very good at cultivating longing. Climate scientists are terrible at cultivating longing. The people in our culture who are good at that are storytellers, artists, and so on. We can't do this without them. So for me, I'm really exploring what does it look like if we do all of this together. And with that, I'm going to close and see if we have any time for questions. And thank you so much for listening. And yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Question. Gabi va se promener dans la salle pour prendre les questions et Ben va les traduire à Rob en direct. S'il y a des questions, on peut y aller. Vous pouvez poser en français et Ben va traduire.
Ma question, c'est, ok, toutes ces idées sont géniales, il n'y a aucun souci. But my question is, ok, ma question c'est comment vous pouvez imaginer qu'en 5 ans, les gens ils changent autant? Parce qu'on a tellement peu évolué que je ne vois pas comment en 5 ans tout le monde peut changer comme ça.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, sometimes I talk about 2030, sometimes I talk about 2035. The important thing is to say this future that I'm talking about is not utopia. This is not the finished article. This is work in progress, but it's amazing work in progress. That's the first thing to say. I'm not talking about utopia. This is a 2030 that results from us doing everything we could have done. None of what I've talked about is some fantastical, unachievable dream thing. I talk about the work that I do as an experiment in evidence-based dreaming. All of the stories that I've shared with you already exist somewhere, right? And when we look back through history, there are so many examples of things changing very fast within 10-year periods. It took 10 years from Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat on that bus to the Civil Rights Act in the United States. It took 10 years from the first international sanctions on South Africa to the new constitution in South Africa. It took 10 years from the first same-sex marriage in the Netherlands to surveys showing that more than half of the people in the world agreed that same-sex marriage was okay. And there's a long list of those things happening in 10 years' time. I'm not saying that this is easy. I'm not also not saying we will do this. What I'm saying is we could. And if we don't keep that possibility open that we could, then it's not going to happen. But if we can build a movement of people which is about positive futurism based on stories of things that we know already work and exist, then I do think we saw even during COVID in that short period of time how quickly things can change. And I think we need to hold on to that as a possibility for these years that we are coming into as well. I'm not saying it's easy, but it is absolutely possible.
Du coup, vous n'avez pas parlé de la Chine et des autres pays justement qui on est sur la même planète, donc les émissions aussi comptent de leur côté et ils sont pas dans le même jeu en fait. Donc comment vous voyez les choses?
Yeah, so I think for me it's so the reason that I talk about Europe and the global north, and those are the stories that I tell when I do this, is because the large majority of emissions in the world are caused by us. The wealthy nations in this world are by far more responsible. And also we have the historic legacy that we started this in the first place, right? So yes, it's important that other places do other things. At the moment, it feels like we are in a time when, whether we're talking about individuals or countries or businesses, we are all sitting and looking at each other and saying and using each other's inaction to justify our own inaction. Well, why should I do so? You know, I hear it so much. Well, why should we do anything? What about China? Well, we don't live in China. We live in France. We live in the UK. That's our sphere of influence. And we use far too much energy, water, resources. We consume too much. And we have a way of living, which we then, and a myth of progress that we export around the world as the new normal. We have a moral obligation to show a different story of what we mean by progress, a different way of living that actually makes us happier and healthier and better connected, that improves our young people's mental health, that allows biodiversity to come back again. We can do that. And that's the bit I think we need to focus on. Of course, China needs to do things. China actually is installing more solar energy every year than the United States has in its entire existence. They are really showing what the fourth industrial revolution looks like. Of course, there are many things about China that are not great and that we don't want to emulate. But I think we need to move away from this idea of saying, but what about them? Well, what about them? What are they doing? It's about us. What are we doing? And actually, this is a time when we need nations in the West to show some leadership on this. And you know, when we started the transition movement in 2008, and I wrote the Manuel de Transition, which some of you will have seen. When we published that book, it argued that we needed to break our dependence on fossil fuels because that was a key vulnerability. What happened in the time between 2008 and now was that Europe sent Vladimir Putin 18 billion euros every month for gas. And during that time, we were told, oh, we can't decarbonize Europe. There's no money. It's too expensive. We can't do it. But we can send Russia 18 billion euros every month for gas. And then now, when the result of sending that much money means that we have the war in Ukraine, European governments say we need to raise 800 billion euros to rearm Europe against Russia. We could have done this instead, and we still do need to do this. And so for me, the question is, what can we do, not focusing on the things that other people aren't doing?
Oui, moi j'ai une question à vous poser. Est-ce que vous pouvez me dire l'élixir de jouvence que vous avez? Parce que je vous ai vu il y a 10 ou 12 ans et vous êtes le petit frère ou le fils de Rob Hopkins. Je sais pas, quel est votre truc? Quelle pilule magique vous avez pour être aussi jeune?
You are very, very kind, and I will come back here and speak to you again. Thank you.
En fait, merci beaucoup pour votre présentation. J'ai deux questions. On parle de storytelling parce qu'on a eu une présentation très intéressante sur l'intelligence artificielle juste avant. Quel storytelling on pourrait avoir différemment sur ça quand on voit les millions et les milliards qui sont investis dans l'intelligence artificielle au lieu de les investir dans la transition écologique? Ça, c'est ma première question. Et la deuxième, vous parlez beaucoup dans le monde je dirais, institutionnel, on voit les rues. Comment est-ce qu'on pourrait imaginer ce futur, exactement le même process, mais dans les entreprises? Et je m'imagine, puisque je bosse dans les entreprises en tant que consultant, comment est-ce que je peux avoir un workshop dans les entreprises pour leur faire imaginer le futur et les projets de demain et les produits de demain? Deux questions très différentes, mais voilà. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I think I understood the second question, but could somebody translate the first question for me?
Ma première question, c'était par rapport à l'intelligence artificielle parce que nous avons une autre présentation juste avant. Et quel autre storytelling on pourrait donner à l'intelligence artificielle pour éviter qu'il y ait des milliards qui sont investis là-dedans et qui soient plus investis dans l'écologie et la transition de demain. C'est plus clair? Je peux la faire en anglais sinon, s'il y a besoin.
Would it be possible to say it in English? I'd be very grateful.
So he's just asking, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So he was asking about
It's about AI.
Yes, it was about AI.
So I will do it in English directly. So we had a nice presentation before on AI, and because it's a lot about storytelling, and how we can have another storytelling about AI to not invest billion in AI development, but to put this million and billion into ecological transition, which doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I feel like AI is just the worst invention at this moment in history. So we know that we need to massively reduce the amount of energy, the amount of water, the amount of resources we use. So billionaires invent this technology, which will require a huge amount of resources and water and energy. And part of the promise that they give us is, well, if we build really good AI, the AI will show us how to solve climate change. I think the only answer AI would give us that would be realistic would be to say, you need to get rid of the billionaires. It's the billionaires that are causing all the problems here. And, you know, if billionaires are investing trillions of dollars to build AI, they are not doing that for the well-being of humanity. They are doing that for the well-being of billionaires. And of course, there are some aspects of AI that are useful. And people will often say to me, oh, but it can do this and it can do that, and it's really useful. The thing for me is all those arguments we hear about AI, it's a race. We have to be at the front of the race. We don't want to be left behind. We have to spend whatever it will cost because this is so important that we have to be at the front of this race. All those same arguments we can use for addressing the climate emergency, but that will actually take us somewhere useful. AI, I don't think really will take us anywhere useful. We can manage perfectly well without it. It's like it's the wrong technology. And so yeah, I'm not a big fan of it. Of course there are useful things. It can be very helpful, I'm told, in terms of creating really efficient renewable energy grids, for example, but the downsides of it feel way bigger. Now Elon Musk is building enormous data centers that just use natural gas, that are driven by fossil fuels. This is the worst thing we could possibly do. Already, when we look at generating enough renewable energy to power France, that's a huge challenge. If we then add in AI, which is already increased, using in America something like 6% of energy use is now going into AI data centers, we can't also do that. It's just madness. And with the second question about businesses, there are some businesses who are starting to recognize that imagination is really important, that it's not often business loves creativity and they really love innovation, but imagination is a bit more, you can't really trust imagination. Imagination is more mischievous and badly behaved. And the thing that I learned writing the book Si, which some of you will have seen, is that the imagination needs space. If you are a company, an organization set up to do a particular thing, you will continue doing that thing very efficiently, very effectively, unless somebody says, I think we just need to stop and think about this and review what we're doing. And so there are some amazing people who are doing imagination training, going into companies. I do it myself. I've worked with Patagonia. I've worked with Balenciaga in Paris. I've worked with the London Marathon organization, and to go in and spend time with them to try and get them to move from doing what they already do to saying, what would it look like if as a company we acted as if this was a climate emergency? It's very different from saying, we have a sustainability plan. It's too late for that now. I want to know how you're going to act like it's an emergency, because it's an emergency. So I do those workshops sometimes. So if there is a company that you would like me to come and do that work with, then get in touch and we can talk about that. I've done quite a lot of that.
Oui, bonjour. Alors, je le dis en français, hein. Bonjour, merci pour la conférence qui était très intéressante, très visionnaire. Vous nous parlez du monde en 2030. En 2030, oui, 2030, ouais. Et comment vous voyez donc le monde? Ben, on est à peu près, enfin, il y a beaucoup de gens qui sont d'accord, peut-être vous aussi, pour dire qu'en fait, le problème actuel d'écologique et autres, ça vient du fait qu'on est dans un monde où les multinationales et le capitalisme nous dirigent. Alors du coup, en 2030, qu'est-ce que serait le monde au niveau du l'alternative au capitalisme serait quoi, selon vous, dans votre vision alternative?
I think that there are many ideas which exist, which are becoming mainstream ideas very quickly. So I think the degrowth movement, for me, is one of the most important movements, ideas on the table. You know, we see with the degrowth movement that they have a very well considered critique of growth. Growth is what will kill us. Growth is a profoundly dangerous, ridiculous idea. The idea that the economy is only successful if it's larger than it was last year. You know, I'm a father. I have 4 sons. Yeah, I wanted some growth with my children. I wanted them to grow for a little while. I wanted them to grow, ideally, until they were just slightly smaller than me. And then I wanted them to grow in other ways, right? I wanted them to become kinder and more skillful and more independent and more creative. I don't just judge the value of my children in the world by them being larger than they were the previous year. So I would only be happy when my children were like, you know, the size of a 5-story house or something. So this idea that just things being bigger all the time is better is a profoundly dangerous idea, because we no longer have the resources, the energy, the capacity of our world to absorb that kind of that growth. So for me, I think degrowth is a very powerful kind of alternative to capitalism. Also, we see in many places in France already like a cooperative economy, a more local economy, a more resilient kind of an economy, people moving their money out of the banks who are doing so much damage and driving the harms that we see, people moving their pensions away from companies like Total, who are causing so much damage, and into other ways of doing things. We know we have influence here. There are decisions we can make that can help this. But I think in the future that I go to visit, it's much more about an economy which is in service of people, rather than people being in service of the economy. And again, this is something, you know, where I'm not saying this is easy, and I'm not saying this will definitely happen. This is not a talk that comes with any guarantees. But what I'm saying is it is possible, and that it is possible because we all decided not to be bystanders. We decided not to be passengers, that we decided that we needed to play an active role in this, and we rolled up our sleeves and we made this world happen. And you know, there have been many extraordinary steps forward in evolution, societally, economically, through history. Now's time for another one.
Oui, merci pour le la vision. Moi, j'avais deux questions. Combien y a-t-il de villes en transition dans le monde actuellement, dans le mouvement des villes en transition, et combien vous espérez en avoir dans l'année? Et la deuxième chose, c'est que notre société est très fracturée, en particulier en France, c'est pareil en Grande-Bretagne, entre des personnes qui sont prêtes à avancer dans le domaine de la transition, et puis toute une partie de la population qui, pour tout un tas de raisons, ne veulent pas renoncer à leur voyage lointain, les agriculteurs qui ont peur de leur prix de vente, de leur prix de revient, etc., etc. Donc il y a une société qui est très fracturée. Comment vous voyez pour finalement favoriser et agrandir ce mouvement vers la transition? Deux questions, les villes en transition et la société fracturée.
So I understood the first one, but I wonder if someone could help me with the second one.
My question is well, I think it will be clearer. So our societies are very fractured between people which are very convinced to go to the transition and people which are very reluctant about it because they want to save their privileges. Agricultures in France, people we don't want to renounce to the international travels and so on and so on. So
Okay.
we can help people to move their mindset, to begin the movement.
Yeah, great, thank you. So the first question was, as I understood it, was about the transition movement and how that's going. And so there are transition groups in, I think, 50 countries now. And for many years, my work was to collect the stories. Sorry, the button just fell off my shirt. For many years, my work was to collect the stories of what those groups are doing and then to share them. And there is so much learning and experience now from the transition movement, but also from other movements, from local food agriculture movements, community energy movements. We know how to do all the different things that we need to do. I'm not so involved at the moment in the transition movement on a day-to-day basis because I'm doing much more of this imagination work. But if you want to find out more about what's happening, Transition Network, their website is transitionnetwork.org, and you can find out lots of up-to-date information and training and resources for transition. In terms of how do we work with people who in a fractured society, there was a survey that came out recently that was based on data from many countries around the world, which said that 89% of people are concerned about climate change, want more action on climate change. The majority of people said they would be happy to pay a little bit more tax in order to fund that. But when they were asked what percentage of the population they imagined also were really concerned about climate change, they said about 40%. So we all believe that we are in a minority when the data suggests that the people who are concerned about climate change are actually a large majority of people at this point, because the science, the lived experience is now kind of overwhelming. We have to recognize, though, that since the Paris Agreement, well, and before, but particularly, I think, since the Paris Agreement, the oil and gas industry, the plastics industry, the industrial meat industry has thrown billions and billions of euros into campaigns of disinformation, into politicians, into shifting the public debate, using the different things like here with Brexit. We saw that we had these very right-wing organizations who amplified these messages through social media. Now we see those same channels are amplifying climate change denial information, this idea that if we decarbonize society, we will all end up living in a cold cave eating green potatoes, all of this kind of nonsense. I feel that the best way that we need to tackle that is by what I said before, in terms of we need a positive futurist movement. We need progressive voices that understand climate science, that understand social justice, to be pushing back against what we're seeing coming from the United States, where people who work in government can't even use the word climate change, aren't allowed to talk about social justice anymore. This is profoundly, profoundly dangerous, and makes it all the more important that in European countries that we talk about it more skillfully, and that we create a kind of transition populism where where we are addressing the challenges that we see, not just talking about that we need to save the planet and we need to save polar bears. If we tackle climate change skillfully and imaginatively, we will improve the living conditions of the vast majority of people across France and across Europe. People will live in much better houses. They will eat much better food. They will have more vibrant local economies that create more jobs. Their children will be healthier. The air will be cleaner. I was in Grand Avignon 3 years ago, and I gave a talk in a school. They asked me to go to a school, 14, 15-year-old kids. And the head teacher of the school was in the room with us. And she said, "Rob, can you give us some practical things the kids could do in the school?" I said, "Well, this was in an area, very, very intensive monoculture, industrial, chemical wine producing region." And I said, "Oh, maybe you could make an insect hotel, you know, to encourage insects." She said, "Oh, we don't have any insects here. We don't have any insects here." I was so shocked. I never went in a place where there was no insects before, you know. So we can build a world where our children's experience is that they start to see the insects come back, they see the birds come back, but also they live in a world where there are more jobs being created through renewable energy, through insulating homes, through all of the innovation that will unlock. We need to talk much, much more about that, because the reality is that the far right's solutions for meeting the needs of working people, whether it's in France, in the UK, in the United States, are a disaster, an absolute short-term, complete disaster. So I feel like we need to become much better at talking about the future in a way that is exciting to people, that meets their needs, and that's how we do what you're talking about, I think.
Ok. Alors, ma question, c'est en fait pour passer vraiment à l'action. Ce serait bien de savoir un petit peu les actions qu'on a sur le climat, parce qu'on peut faire une action qui a peu d'impact sur le climat ou une autre action qui a beaucoup d'impact. Donc, est-ce que dans le site que vous citiez précédemment, vous donnez des exemples des actions qu'on peut avoir concrètes et quelle importance elles ont sur le climat? Je donne un exemple. Dans votre reportage, on voit beaucoup la végétalisation des rues. Est-ce que vous l'avez choisi parce que c'est ce qui a le plus d'impact sur le climat ou parce que c'est le plus simple à mettre en place? Donc, est-ce que vous privilégiez une action qui peut être faite facilement par tout le monde ou dans l'urgence d'aujourd'hui, ce qui a le plus d'impact en fait?
Yeah, good question. I think it's always a mixture. You know, there are things that we can do, that we can just start tomorrow, that are really not that complicated, and then there are the big more complicated things. You know, when you look at something like, you know, I showed you images from Utrecht in Holland, where they have this incredible cycling infrastructure all across Holland, just mind-blowing. And but then if you visit Paris now, you know, the change in Paris over the last 10 years. I remember going to Paris 10 years ago. If I saw somebody riding a bicycle, I wanted to take them home and check they were okay. And what are you doing? It's so dangerous. Now you be building the infrastructure. More and more people use it. I think last year was the first time in Paris where more journeys in Paris were taken by bicycle than were taken by car. This is because the infrastructure is being built and the infrastructure works. But it's very important for us to remember that when you go to Utrecht and you see that happening, that didn't happen just because the government said, oh yeah, let's do that. That happened because in 1972, 3,000 people were killed by cars, 400 of them children. And there was a campaign that emerged in the Netherlands, all across the Netherlands, that was called Stop the Child Murder. And children came out and closed their streets and reclaimed those streets. And then that built into what we see now, that when we go to Holland, we just think, well, it must have always been like this. It absolutely wasn't always like this. So there is a mixture of things we need to do. So building a new renewable energy grid takes lots of, we need to build a new energy system. That's complicated, but it's possible. And we need to move people away from cars. Paris shows you can do that. If as a municipality you act with ambition and purpose, people will follow. The story that I told you from Montsartou, where they are making the school meals there, and how that impacted the behavior of people. I felt like in France, some of you will know me from the film Demain, from the film that Cyril Dion made, Demain. And that film, when that came out in 2015 after the Paris Agreement, I went to many, many screenings of that film across France because I was in the film. People said, you are the guy from Demain. We want you to come and... So I saw many, many screenings. I felt like in the 2 or 3 years after Demain, that France... Because that film was shown in cinemas for months and months. It was shown in municipalities, in boardrooms, in schools, in universities. It felt to me like France was really ready to do something really bold. That film had such an amazing impact. And then there was the big citizens' assembly that Cyril Dion organized, and President Macron said, we will implement all the findings, all the suggestions from this. And then when he actually got the suggestions, he said, no, we're not going to do that. That was such a bad move, I think, that actually France was really ready then to do something really bold and audacious. We need to get back to that place, I think, because yes, there's a lot of things. We need government to change. We need industry to change. Absolutely. But there's a huge amount that we can change too, just by starting where we are with the people that we have around us and not waiting for permission.
La dernière. Et donc, pour conclure, et ça revient sur les 3 dernières questions, c'est concrètement, là, on est une centaine, il y aura peut-être des milliers de personnes qui vont voir la vidéo. Qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire concrètement, à part t'inscrire à ta newsletter, acheter le livre et faire du vélo?
What can you do? So, I think the first thing is that we have to recognize that what can I do is the wrong question. For me, the question is, what can we do? We have to recognize that we do this together, and we need to find the people around us who also care about this. There will be, where you live, lots of people who are already motivated and who feel the urgency of these times and the need to do something. They are there. You may not know them yet, but you can find them. You could organize an event. I remember when we, quite early, when we started the transition movement, a woman sent us an email from Australia. She said, I live in a town and nobody else in this town cares about transition at all. I'm the only person in this town who cares about transition. And we said, Really? How do you know that? Maybe you're not the only person who cares about transition. And then 3 months later, she wrote to us and said, I put an advert in my local newspaper asking if anyone else was interested. I got 140 replies. So there are people out there who share this. Find those people and start something with them, and start something which tells a story, and start something because which will give people an experience that they can make change happen. And there are many, many transition groups in France, and you can learn from their experiences. There's an amazing document on the Transition Network's website called The Essential Guide to Doing Transition, which you can find in French as well. That distills everything that we know and have learned from this movement so far. But also the thing is, find what excites you. Maybe there are some of you here who could actually get more involved in politics and try and influence the direction of your local municipality. Maybe there are some of you who run businesses, who work in businesses, who can try and push them in very different directions. Again, finding people who can support the work that you're doing. So I think the main thing is to recognize this is not going to happen by accident. This is going to happen because we all played a role, and we need to find the way to do that, and to recognize that it's not just about us as individuals. This is something that we need to do with other people. And one thing that I have learned from the transition movement is that I have met tens of thousands of people involved in transition. Nobody has ever said to me, my life was so much happier before I got involved in transition. It was so much, it was so much simpler. And one man said to me once, even if this group ended tomorrow, I know 200 people I didn't know before this started. And that's really, really important to me. So build networks, find your allies, make things happen.
Sharif, tu peux mettre ta vidéo? Merci. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We stay in touch.
Yes. Thank you, everybody, for staying awake. It must be very late where you are. I'm very grateful that you all stayed awake. Thank you. And maybe next time, maybe we see you in person next time.